Among the reasons Anthony remained a full-time journalist at the Global Journal were two main ones: his love of journalism as an art and the lack of alternatives in the village. He did not aspire to larger cities, rightly believing that no one was waiting for him there. And after the sleepy village, where news came late, he was unlikely to settle in. The Global Journal was a 6-page, low-quality, bi-weekly publication. The biggest news stories were placed on the front page under a large headline. The last part of the paper was taken up by announcements, obituaries, and congratulations. In the middle section you could find the works of Anthony, who managed to pull stories out of literally nothing. And, let's face it, sometimes he lied a little bit. Well, like a little. The village was a quiet town, drifting peacefully on the edge of things, and to shake up its quiet existence, Anthony made up news stories with screaming headlines. Spirited mouse bites student. This was followed by 2 columns about a mouse that had come to life in a biology class, jumped out of a jar, and bit 16-year-old Mr. N. A number of measures were taken to save the victim, and the mouse was caught and burned. It burned, they say, perfectly well, like a torch, for it was alcoholized through and through. A doll made of teeth found in the hangman's house. Anthony sometimes clung to stories that really happened. There was a drunkard here who lived on the outskirts. The village consisted mostly of brick houses, but on the outskirts there were rustic single-family homes. The man was found hanged in such a house and had been hanging there for at least 6 months. In the winter, it had frozen and frosted over, and when spring and summer came, it gave off a foul odor. Anthony, who was extremely curious, visited the place and took some photographs, which the editor-in-chief refused to print. A frustrated Anthony embellished the text, especially in describing a sod doll supposedly stuffed with real human teeth. Naturally, everyone in the village knew, or if not, at least suspected, that the materials signed Anthony S. contained only a grain of truth. They were, however, eager to discuss the new stories. The most devoted fans made compilations of the creepiest stories. These compilations turned into entire folders that went from hand to hand, and prolific author Anthony wrote more and more. Anthony had a dream, as almost every human being does. He was able to fulfill it, which not everyone can. He dreamed of creating the kind of material that would secure him the editor-in-chief's chair. It would give him the opportunity to take Global Journal to a better level. Better quality paper, more pages, maybe even color photos. At times like this, Anthony wistfully recalled the footage of the hanging man. But conventional fiction was no match for dream material, and nothing was happening in the neighborhood. Alas, Anthony lived in anticipation of the very story that would provide him with a ticket to a more or less satisfactory future. But as time went on, the village and its environs continued to sleep, and nothing more exciting than a drunken stabbing outside a convenience store was happening. Anthony prowled through friends and their acquaintances, picking up all sorts of gossip and rumors, trying to get a grip on anything. He didn't expect to win a Pulitzer Prize. Although Anthony was a fiction writer, he was not without a realistic view of the world, and amidst the mundane reality, something appropriate finally appeared. The orphanage was a couple dozen kilometers from the border of the village, just off the highway. To get there, you had to turn off onto a dirt road, where water always accumulated in ruts and holes after the rains. After 10 minutes of shaking, causing weakness even in the most resistant, the forest parted, revealing a low concrete fence, more of a boundary marker than an obstacle. Behind it stretched a yard covered with long-ago cracked asphalt, from the cracks of which bunches of weeds grew thickly. A little farther on was a strip of trampled lawn with swings and a slanted merry-go-round. Nearby were 3 greenhouses and a vegetable garden. The gate was ajar, not a sign of hospitality, but rather indifference to the fact that anyone could get in and out. The weather-beaten sign read Children's Home 14. No joy or sunshine, Anthony wrote in his draft. No one paid attention to the car pulling up to the gate. No one looked out of the windows to greet the guests. Apathy, indifference, a resigned resignation to tomorrow, and the hope that it won't be worse than the last. The house looks more like a long-abandoned barracks than a living space where children play and learn. Made of grey panels, it squints blindly through curtained windows that even on this sunny day seem deafening and dark. I wouldn't be surprised if no one has set foot here in years, and the house has been empty for a long time. Slamming the door of the old Mazda, Anthony looked around, feeling a little confused. Writing about the problems of a children's institution that was clearly underfunded from unknown sources was a well-intentioned endeavor, but he expected to see at least a few children playing in the yard, weeding the vegetable garden, or the teachers smoking on the porch. Instead, he was confronted with a deafening emptiness, disturbed only by the sounds of the surrounding woods. The long rusted hinges of the gate shrieked at a frequency unpleasant to the human ear. With a wince, Anthony entered the yard and walked resolutely toward the porch, mentally processing his impressions into a text that would later come to life on paper. The crunch of sand on asphalt, the rustle of grass, the flapping of the torn edge of the film on the greenhouse, the crumbled porch steps and railing, ironed to a shine by thousands of touches. Something glistened brightly on the railing, blowing sun bunnies into his eyes. Anthony squinted and, coming closer, found the source of the glitter, a pair of large shards of bottle glass. One was brown, probably from beer, the other green from a soda bottle. He picked up the brown shard and looked through it at the sun for some reason, risking burning his retinas. "If it's not yours, don't touch it," a voice said sullenly. Asterisk, 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 shuddering, Anthony almost dropped the glass. A child with a short haircut, a t-shirt faded from the sun and many washes, and a scratch on his nose, was staring at him unkindly through the bars of the railing. Reaching up, he raked both panes of glass into his hand with the agility of a monkey and jumped back onto the asphalt. "I won't," Anthony said penitently. The house wasn't so abandoned, at least, not in terms of its contents, though it still looked shabby. The boy didn't answer. He carefully wiped both glasses with the hollow of his t-shirt, slipped them into the pocket of his sweatpants, and stared at Anthony. "I'm Anthony." The man hastened to introduce himself. "I'm a representative of the Global Journal newspaper. I'll be writing a story about this house." The occupant of house number 14 blinked. Anthony's identity did not seem to interest him. He took the green glass out of his pocket and looked through it at Anthony. The boy suddenly stretched his lips in a not very pretty smile and changed his anger into mercy. "Okay, write it down. My name is Christopher. Just don't look through the brown glass anymore, or you'll see things. Will you take me to one of the older men?" Anthony asked, looking at Christopher and rapidly retaining in his mind the first impressions of his appearance. "And why can't you look through the brown glass?" Christopher did not answer at once. He tucked his treasure back into his pocket, then coughed and walked around the porch to the door of the house. It wasn't until he opened the door and took a step inside that he spoke. "Because through the brown glass shows some things, and the green one shows things as they are." Had to be satisfied with that explanation. Officially, Francesca Crutz is listed as a senior caretaker, but de facto she does all the work that she can do during the day, because the staff in the house is very limited. So she has to take on additional responsibilities for a salary of $4,000, money that is not even enough to pay the utility bills. "If not me, then who?" Francesca Crutz says of her job with a sigh. Here Anthony is forced to embellish reality, because Francesca Crutz meets him with a storm of anger, simultaneously demanding answers for the meager funding and apologizing for the unpresentable appearance of both the home and its residents. Look at that. You'll fall. God forgive you. You won't be able to pick up a bone," Francesca explained, picking up a layer of linoleum that had been trampled to a brown base with her foot. "We'll nail it on the edge, but it doesn't hold a damn thing. Annie March almost broke her nose the other day when she tripped over the edge." Anthony scribbled a few lines in his notebook with a pencil. A few camera flashes illuminated the hall. Over the course of a couple hours, Francesca, who gave Anthony a brief tour of both floors of the facility, she took him to the basement, showed him the puddle of standing water on the floor that had leaked from the pipes. Then she took him to the kitchen, which smelled of boiled cabbage and rags. Next came the classroom, the children's rooms. There were surprisingly few children here. And the recreation room. Everywhere, devastation and desolation. And the children, pale and unhealthy in appearance, were suspiciously quiet, either in honor of Anthony's arrival, or they had no energy for noisy games. For himself, Anthony had always imagined the orphans to be more mobile children than children, after all. But there was something wrong with these ones. And here we have tomatoes, cabbage, potatoes. Francesca finished proudly, showing Anthony the last attraction. In the woods we pick mushrooms and berries in the fall. But not enough, of course. May you all rot there, you damned bastards. She shook her fist at the sky. Anthony was offered a place in one of the empty bedrooms for the night. Draped linens, drafts blowing in from the cracks in the windows, a creaky bed with a bed net like a hospital. After some thought, he left his t-shirt on to keep warm, and wrapped himself in a thin blanket and began to look through the day's photos on his soapbox. The device captured with precision the state of the walls, the plaster, the piece of linoleum in the corridor scolded by Francesca, the crack in the ceiling of the assembly hall, now used more as a warehouse, and, of course, pictures of the children. Children, children and children again, about 30 in all, each thin and pale, with an adult longing in their eyes and their own little quirks. Christopher and his glasses were far from the only ones. Anthony also met Nick, Mary, Annie, Gordon. One made dolls out of dried chicken bones and grass, the other marked each passing day, with a dot on the wall behind the bed. Anthony was too shy to ask what would happen when the wall ended. There were children who collected broken-off cup handles, and others who could watch birds fly 4 hours. Anthony flipped through the photos until he noticed something odd. In almost every picture, there was a girl in the background. The girl had no face. At first Anthony thought it was a defect in the photograph. Perhaps the girl had moved while taking the picture and the cheap soapbox had blurred her features. But after a second look it became clear that the camera had nothing to do with it. The face was missing. Arms, legs, polka-dot chintz dress, everything was in place. But where people usually have faces, there was smooth skin. It wasn't healthy. The room grew considerably colder. Shivering, Anthony wrapped himself as tightly as possible in the thin blanket and tried to sleep, driving the ominous girls out of his mind. Gradually his thoughts centered on the article, and he drifted into sleep. Francesca. How many children live in the house in total? Anthony asked in the morning. 28, replied the woman. You saw them all yesterday. Here they are, all here. I didn't miss anyone. Is there a girl like that? Small, in a dress, with a rather unimpressive face. Anthony hesitated, but then added, though generally memorable. Francesca looked at him puzzled. Brown glass. She sighed at last. Anthony was pleased at first, thinking she understood who she was talking about, but then felt confused. Yes, I was looking through the shard at the sun. You shouldn't have. You shouldn't have, Francesca said with obvious relief and instantly looked older. She saw you. Didn't realize it right away. Should have kept you away. But, on the other hand, I could use the extra hands. In the garden, nail up some linoleum. Who saw it? Anthony asked, smiling. What hands? Are you serious? I was just going to. Martinique is her name, the teacher went on, as if she hadn't heard. She has no face. If you see her, you're dead. You'll never come home. What do you mean I won't come back? Anthony got nervous. I'm gonna get in my car and drive away. Thank you for your hospitality. And he took a step back, suddenly realizing that Francesca was probably crazy. The age, the stressful job, the environment, the kids, one of them weirder than the other. She's always been here and always will be. When they built the house here, everything went wrong from the first day, and then they closed it down. She continued her story monotonously, but you can't undo what happened. Look through the green glass when you go back. Everything will become clear. Anthony couldn't find anything to say to that, so he headed for the exit. Two shards of glass lay on the porch railing, casting a cheerful splash of sunlight. The owner of them was nowhere to be seen. Looking around, Anthony picked up the green glass with 2 fingers and, sighing, held it up to his eye. All was well and good in the green-lit world, except for a large hole in the rotten boards of the porch. Anthony, feeling weak in the knees, stepped forward and peered cautiously in. There he lay himself, with his neck twisted badly sideways. The paper from his notebook was scattered fanning around him. Flies swarmed around the clouded eyes. Anthony dropped the shard and recoiled. In essence, the glass was no longer needed to realize how things really were. On the roof of a car parked behind the Orotas sat Martinique, a girl without a face. But she clearly saw Anthony without any difficulty, and waved cheerfully at him.